book club. So last time I believe that was the one where Harry got the Marauders map, snuck into Honeydukes, got into Hogsmeade, hung out with Ron and Hermione, had some butterbeers, and overheard a conversation about Sirius Black being the Potter's secret keeper, and apparently there was a horrific betrayal, and Harry Potter is very upset. Meanwhile, Buckbeak the Hippogriff is sentenced to potentially something bad in the care of magical creatures, like protection people or whatever, because Lucius Malfoy, after Draco talked to his dad about what happened, there's bad stuff happening now for Hagrid's creature. And in addition to that, Harry Potter was mysteriously sent an international class racing broom, the Firebolt, which they don't know who sent it to Harry, and Hermione told Professor McGonagall about it because Hermione suspected it might have been sent by Sirius Black and it could be cursed or something. So McGonagall took the Firebolt away, and Ron and Hermione are kind of upset at the situation. That's what happened last time. I guess we are over halfway through. We're just over halfway through Prisoner of Azkaban, the third book in the Harry Potter series. And today we'll do some chapters and see how it goes. The next chapter, chapter 12, is called The Patronus. And let's see what that's about. So, I'm not really. The first couple books are really short, so it gets longer, and I'm starting to slow down my reading a little bit in terms of like the number of chapters per stream. So there's plenty more coming. Okay. Chapter 12, The Patronus. Harry knew that Hermione had meant well, but that didn't stop him from being angry with her. He had been the owner of the best broom in the world for a few short hours, and now, because of her interference, he didn't know whether he would ever see it again. He was positive that there was nothing wrong with the Firebolt now, but what sort of state would it be in once it had been subjected to all sort of anti-jinx tests? Ron was furious with Hermione too. As far as he was concerned, the stripping down of a brand new Firebolt was nothing less than criminal damage. Hermione, who remained convinced that she had acted for the best, started avoiding the common room. Harry and Ron supposed she had taken refuge in the library and didn't try to persuade her to come back. All in all, they were glad when the rest of the school returned shortly after New Year, and Gryffindor Tower became crowded and noisy again. Wood sought Harry out on the night before term started. "Had a good Christmas," he said, and then, without waiting for an answer, he sat down, lowered his voice, and said, "I've been doing some thinking over Christmas, Harry. After the last match, if the Dementors come to the next one, we can't afford you to, well..." Wood broke off, looking awkward. "I'm working on it," said Harry quickly. "Professor Lupin said he'd train me to ward off the Dementors. We should be starting this week. He said he'd have time after Christmas." "Ah," said Wood, his expression clearing. "Well, in that case, I really didn't want to lose you as Seeker, Harry. And have you ordered a new broom yet?" "No," said Harry. "What? You'd better get a move on, You can't ride that shooting star against Ravenclaw." "He got a Firebolt for Christmas," said Ron. "A Firebolt? No, seriously, a real Firebolt?" "Don't get excited, Oliver," said Harry gloomily. "I haven't got it anymore. It was confiscated." And he explained all about how the Firebolt was now being checked for jinxes. Jinxed? How could it be jinxed? Sirius Black, Harry said wearily. He's supposed to be after me, so McGonagall reckons he might have sent it. Waving aside the information that a famous murderer was after his seeker, Wood said, "But Black couldn't have bought a firebolt. He's on the run. The whole country's on the lookout for him. How could he walk into Quality Quidditch Supplies and buy a broomstick?" "I know," said Harry, "but McGonagall still wants to strip it down." Wood went pale. "I'll go and talk to her, Harry," he promised. "I'll make her see reason. A firebolt. A real firebolt on our team. She wants Gryffindor to win as much as we do. I'll make her see sense. A firebolt." Classes started again the next day. The last thing anyone felt like doing was spending 2 hours on the grounds on a raw January morning, but Hagrid had provided a bonfire full of salamanders for their enjoyment, and they spent an unusually good lesson collecting dry wood and leaves to keep the fire blazing while the flame-loving lizards scampered up and down the crumpling white-hot logs. The first divination lesson of the new term was much less fun. Professor Trelawney was now teaching them palmistry, and she lost no time in informing Harry that he had the shortest lifeline she had ever seen. It was defense against the dark arts that Harry was keen to. After his conversation with Wood, he wanted to get started on his anti-Dementor lessons as soon as possible. "Ah, yes," said Lupin, when Harry reminded him of his promise at the end of class. "Let me see. How about 8 o'clock on Thursday evening? The History of Magic classroom should be large enough. I'll have to think carefully about how we're going to do this. We can't bring a real Dementor into the castle to practice on." "Still looks ill, doesn't he?" said Ron, after they walked down the corridor heading to dinner. "What do you reckon's the matter with him?" There was a loud and impatient "Tuh!" from behind them. It was Hermione, who had been sitting on the floor at the feet of a suit of armor, repacking her bag, which was so full of books it wouldn't close. "And what are you tutting at us for?" said Ron irritably. "Nothing," said Hermione in a lofty voice, heaving her bag back over her shoulder. "Yes, you were," said Ron. "I said, I wonder what's wrong with Lupin, and you—" "Well, isn't it obvious?" said Hermione, with a look of maddening superiority. "If you don't want to tell us, don't," snapped Ron. "Fine," said Hermione haughtily, and she marched off. "She doesn't know," said Ron, staring resentfully after Hermione. "She's just trying to get us to talk to her again." At 8 o'clock on Thursday evening, Harry left Gryffindor Tower for the History of Magic classroom. It was dark and empty when he arrived, but he lit the lamps with his wand and had waited only 5 minutes when Professor Lupin turned up, carrying a large packing case which he heaved onto Professor Binns' desk. "What's that?" said Harry. "Another Boggart," said Lupin, stripping off his cloak. "I've been combing the castle ever since Tuesday, and very luckily I found one lurking inside Mr. Filch's filing cabinet. It's the nearest we'll get to a real Dementor. The Boggart will turn into a Dementor when he sees you, so we'll be able to practice on him. I can store him in my office when we're not using him. There's a cupboard under my desk he'll like." "Okay," said Harry, trying to sound as though he wasn't apprehensive at all and merely glad that Lupin had found such a good substitute for a real Dementor. So, Professor Lupin had taken out his wand and indicated Harry should do the same. "The spell I'm going to try to teach you is highly advanced magic, Harry, well beyond ordinary wizarding level. It's called the Patronus Charm." "How does it work?" said Harry nervously. "Well, when it works correctly, it conjures up a Patronus," said Lupin, "which is a kind of anti-Dementor, a guardian that acts as a shield between you and the Dementor." Harry had a sudden vision of himself crouching behind a Hagrid-sized figure holding a large club. Professor Lupin continued, "The Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. But it cannot feel despair, as real humans can, so the Dementors can't hurt it. But I must warn you, Harry, that the charm might be too advanced for you. Many qualified wizards have difficulty with it." "What does a Patronus look like?" said Harry curiously. "Each one is unique to the wizard who conjures it." And how do you conjure it? With an incantation, which will work only if you are concentrating with all your might on a single, very happy memory. Harry cast his mind about for a happy memory. Certainly, nothing that had happened to him at the Dursleys was going to do. Finally, he settled on the moment when he had first ridden a broomstick. Right, he said, trying to recall exactly as possible the wonderful soaring sensation of his stomach. The incantation is this. Lupin cleared his throat. Expecto Patronum. Expecto Patronum, Harry repeated under his breath. Expecto Patronum. Concentrating hard on your happy memory. Oh, yeah, said Harry, quickly forcing his thoughts back to that first broom ride. Expecto Patronum. Sorry. Expecto Patronum. Expecto Patronum. Something whooshed suddenly out of the end of his wand. It looked like a wisp of silvery gas. Did you see that? Said Harry excitedly. Something happened. Very good, said Lupin, smiling. Right, then ready to try it on a Dementor? Yes, Harry said, gripping his wand very tightly and moving into the middle of the deserted classroom. He tried to keep his mind on flying, but something else kept intruding. Any second now, he might hear his mother again. But he shouldn't think that, or he would hear her again, and he didn't want to. Or did he? Lupin grasped the lid of the packing case and pulled. A Dementor rose slowly from the box, its hooded face turned toward Harry, one glistening, scabbed hand gripping its cloak. The lamps around the classroom flickered and went out. The Dementor stepped from the box and started to sweep silently toward Harry, drawing a deep, rattling breath. A wave of piercing cold broke over him. Expecto Patronum, Harry yelled. Expecto Patronum! Expecto... But the classroom and the Dementor were dissolving. Harry was falling again, through a thick, white fog, and his mother's voice was louder than ever, echoing inside his head. Not Harry! Not Harry! Please, I'll do anything. Stand aside, girl. Harry! Harry jerked back to life. He was lying flat on his back on the floor. The classroom lamps were alight again. He didn't have to ask what had happened. Sorry, he muttered, sitting up and feeling cold sweat trickling down behind his glasses. Are you all right? Said Lupin. Yes. Harry pulled himself up on one of the desks and leaned against it. Here, Lupin handed him a chocolate frog. Eat this before we try again. I didn't expect you to do it your first time. In fact, I would have been astounded if you had. It's getting worse, Harry muttered, biting off the frog's head. I could hear her louder that time, and him, Voldemort. Lupin looked paler than usual. Harry, if you don't want to continue, I will more than understand. I do, said Harry fiercely, stuffing the rest of the chocolate frog into his mouth. I've got to. What if the Dementors turn up at our match against Ravenclaw? I can't afford to fall off again. If we lose this game, we've lost the Quidditch Cup. All right then, said Lupin. You might want to select another memory, a happy memory. I mean, to concentrate on... That one doesn't seem to have been strong enough. Harry thought hard and decided his feelings when Gryffindor had won the house championship last year had definitely qualified as very happy. He gripped his wand tightly again and took up his position in the middle of the classroom. Ready? Said Lupin, gripping the box lid. Ready, said Harry, trying hard to fill his head with happy thoughts about Gryffindor winning and not dark thoughts about what was going to happen when the box opened. Go, said Lupin, pulling off the lid. The room went icily cold and dark once more. The Dementor glided forward, drawing its breath. One rotting hand was extending toward Harry. Expecto Patronum, Harry yelled. Expecto Patronum. Expecto Pat... White fog obscured his senses. Big, blurred shapes were moving around him. Then came a new voice, a man's voice, shouting, panicking. Lily, take Harry and go. It's him. Go, run. I'll hold him off. The sounds of someone stumbling from a room, a door bursting open, a cackle of high-pitched laughter. Harry, Harry, wake up. Lupin was tapping Harry hard on the face. This time it was a minute before Harry understood why he was lying on a dusty classroom floor. "I heard my dad," Harry mumbled. "That's the first time I've ever heard him. He tried to take on Voldemort himself to give my mom time to run for it." Harry suddenly realized that there were tears on his face, mingling with the sweat. He bent his face as low as possible, wiping them off his robes, pretending to do up his shoelace so that Lupin wouldn't see. "You heard James?" said Lupin in a strange voice. "Yeah." Face dry, Harry looked up. "Why, you didn't know my dad, did you?" I did, as a matter of fact," said Lupin. "We were friends at Hogwarts. Listen, Harry, perhaps we should leave it here for tonight. This charm is ridiculously advanced. I shouldn't have suggested putting you through this." "No," said Harry. He got up again. "I'll have one more go. I'm not thinking of happy enough things. That's what it is. Hang on." He racked his brains. A really, really happy memory. One that he could turn into a good, strong Patronus. The moment when he'd first found out he was Wizard and would be leaving the Dursleys for Hogwarts. If that wasn't a happy memory, he didn't know what was. Concentrating very hard on how he felt when he'd realized he'd be leaving Privet Drive, Harry got to his feet and faced the packing case once more. "Ready?" said Lupin, who looked as though he were doing this against his better judgment. Concentrating hard? "All right, go." He pulled off the lid of the case for the third time, and the Dementor rose out of it, and the room felt cold and dark. "Expecto Patronum!" Harry bellowed. "Expecto Patronum! Expecto Patronum!" The screaming inside Harry's head had started again, except this time it sounded as though it were coming from a badly tuned radio. Softer and louder and softer again. And you could still see the Dementor. It had halted, and then a huge silvery shadow came bursting out of the end of Harry's wand, to hover between him and the Dementor. And though Harry's legs felt like water, he was still on his feet, though for how much longer he wasn't sure. "Ridiculous!" roared Lupin, springing forward. There was a loud crack, and Harry's cloudy Patronus vanished, along with the Dementor. He sank into a chair, feeling as exhausted as if he'd just run a mile, and felt his legs shaking. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Professor Lupin forcing the boggart back into the packing case with his wand. It had turned into a silvery orb again. "Excellent," Lupin said, striding over to where Harry sat. "Excellent, Harry. That was definitely a start. Can we have another go? Just one more go?" "Not now," said Lupin firmly. "You've had enough for one night. Here." He handed Harry a large bar of Honeyduke's best chocolate. "Eat the lot, or Madame Pomfrey will be after my blood. Same time next week." "Okay," said Harry. He took a bite of the chocolate and watched Lupin extinguishing the lamps that had rekindled with the disappearance of the Dementor. A thought had just occurred to him. "Professor Lupin," he said, "if you knew my dad, you must have known Sirius Black as well." Lupin turned very quickly. "What gives you that idea?" he said sharply. "Nothing. I just knew they were friends at Hogwarts too." Lupin's face relaxed. "Yes, I knew him," he said shortly. "Or I thought I did. You'd best be off, Harry. It's getting late." Harry left the classroom, walking along the corridor and around a corner, then took a detour behind a suit of armor and sank down on its plinth to finish his chocolate, wishing he hadn't mentioned Black, as Lupin was obviously not keen on the subject. Then Harry's thoughts wandered back to his mother and father. He felt drained and strangely empty, even though he was so full of chocolate. Terrible though it was to hear his parents' last moments replayed inside his head, these were the only times Harry had heard their voices since he was a very small child. But he'd never be able to produce a proper Patronus if he half wanted to hear his parents again. "They're dead," he told himself sternly. "They're dead, and listening to echoes of them won't bring them back. You'd better get a grip on yourself if you want that Quidditch cup." He stood up, crammed the last bit of chocolate into his mouth, and headed back to Gryffindor Tower. Ravenclaw played Slytherin a week after the start of term. Slytherin won, though narrowly. According to Wood, this was good news for Gryffindor, who would take second place if they beat Ravenclaw too. He therefore increased the number of team practices to 5 a week. This meant that with Lupin's anti-Dementor classes, which in themselves were more draining than 6 Quidditch practices, Harry had just 1 night a week to do all his homework. Even so, he wasn't showing the strain nearly as much as Hermione, whose immense workload finally seemed to be getting to her. Every night, without fail, Hermione was to be seen in a corner of the common room, several tables spread with books, arithmancy charts, rune dictionaries, diagrams of muggles lifting heavy objects, and file upon file of extensive notes. She barely spoke to anybody and snapped when she was interrupted. "How's she doing it?" Ron muttered to Harry one evening as Harry sat finishing a nasty essay on undetectable poisons for Snape. Harry looked up. Hermione was barely visible behind a tottering pile of books. "Doing what?" "Going to all her classes," Ron said. "I heard her talking to Professor Vector, the arithmancy witch, this morning." "Oh, Professor Vector, the arithmancy witch. That's an interesting name for connection between vector and arithmancy. I find that kind of interesting. Sorry, just a little comment. I saw her talking to Professor Vector, that arithmancy witch, this morning. They were going on about yesterday's lesson, but Hermione can't have been there because she was with us in Care of Magical Creatures. And Ernie Macmillan told me she's never missed a Muggle Studies class, but half of them are at the same time as Divination, and she's never missed one of them either. Harry didn't have time to fathom the mystery of Hermione's impossible schedule at the moment. He really needed to get on with Snape's essay. 2 seconds later, however, he was interrupted again, this time by Wood. "Bad news, Harry. I've just been to see Professor McGonagall about the firebolt. She, got a bit shirty with me. Told me I got my priorities wrong. Seemed to think I cared more about winning the cup than I do about you staying alive. Just because I told her I didn't care if it threw you off, as long as you caught the snitch first." Wood shook his head in disbelief. "Honestly, the way she was yelling at me, you'd think I'd said something terrible. Then I asked her how much longer she was going to keep it." He screwed up his face and imitated Professor McGonagall's severe voice. "As long as necessary, Wood. I reckon it's time you ordered a new broom, Harry. There's an order form at the back of Which Broomstick. You could get a Nimbus 2001 like Malfoy's got." "I'm not buying anything Malfoy thinks is good," said Harry flatly. January faded imperceptibly into February with no change in the bitterly cold weather. The match against Ravenclaw was drawing nearer and nearer, but Harry still hadn't ordered a new broom. He was now asking Professor McGonagall for news of the firebolt after every Transfiguration lesson, Ron standing hopefully at his shoulder, Hermione rushing past with her face averted. "No, Potter, you can't have it back yet," Professor McGonagall told him the 12th time this happened, before he'd even opened his mouth. "We've checked it for most of the usual curses, but Professor Flitwick believes the broom might be carrying a hurling hex. I shall tell you once we finish checking it. Now please stop badgering me." To make matters even worse, Harry's anti-Dementor lessons were not going nearly as well as he had hoped. Several sessions on, he was able to produce an indistinct, silvery shadow every time the Boggart Dementor approached him. But his Patronus was too feeble to drive the Dementor away. All it did was lower, like a semi-transparent cloud, draining Harry of energy as he fought to keep it there. Harry felt angry with himself, guilty about his secret desire to hear his parents' voices again. "You're expecting too much of yourself," said Professor Lupin sternly in their 4th week of practice. "For a 13-year-old wizard, even an indistinct Patronus is a huge achievement. You aren't passing out anymore, are you?" "I thought a Patronus would charge the Dementors down or something," said Harry dispiritedly. "Make them disappear." "The true Patronus does do that," said Lupin. "But you've achieved a great deal in a very short space of time. If the Dementors put an appearance at your next Quidditch match, you'll be able to keep them at bay long enough to get back to the ground." "You said it's harder if there are loads of them," said Harry. I have complete confidence in you, said Lupin, smiling. Here, you earned a drink, something from the Three Broomsticks. You won't have tried it before. He pulled 2 bottles out of his briefcase. Butterbeer, said Harry, without thinking. Yeah, I like that stuff. Lupin raised an eyebrow. Oh, Ron and Hermione brought some back from Hogsmeade, Harry lied quickly. I see, said Lupin, though he still looked slightly suspicious. Well, let's drink to a Gryffindor victory against Ravenclaw. Not that I'm supposed to take sides, as a teacher, he added hastily. They drank the butterbeer in silence, until Harry voiced something he'd been wondering for a while. What's under a Dementor's hood? Professor Lupin lowered his bottle thoughtfully. Well, the only people who really know are in no condition to tell us. You see, the Dementor lowers its hood only to use its last and worst weapon. What's that? They call it the Dementor's Kiss, said Lupin, with a slightly twisted smile. It's what Dementors do to those they wish to destroy utterly. I suppose there must be some kind of mouth under there, because they clamp their jaws upon the mouth of the victim and suck out his soul. Harry accidentally spat out a bit of butterbeer. What? They kill? Oh no, said Lupin. Much worse than that. You can exist without your soul, you know, as long as your brain and heart are still working. But you'll have no sense of self anymore. No memory. No anything. There's no chance at all of recovery. You'll just exist as an empty shell, and your soul is gone forever. Lost. Lupin drank a little more butterbeer, then said, It's the fate that awaits Sirius Black. It was in the Daily Prophet this morning. The Ministry have given the Dementors permission to perform it if they find him. Harry sat stunned for a moment at the idea of someone having their soul sucked out through their mouth, but then he thought of Black. He deserves it, he said suddenly. You think so? Said Professor Lupin lightly. Do you really think anyone deserves that? Yes, said Harry defiantly. For some things. He would have liked to have told Lupin about the conversation he'd overheard about Black and the Three Broomsticks, about Black betraying his mother and father, but it would have involved revealing that he'd gone to Hogsmeade without permission, and he knew Lupin wouldn't be very impressed by that. So he finished his butterbeer, thanked Lupin, and left the History of Magic classroom. Harry half wished that he hadn't asked what was under a Dementor's hood. The answer had been so horrible, and he was so lost in unpleasant thoughts of what it would feel like to have your soul sucked out of you, that he walked headlong into Professor McGonagall halfway up the stairs. Do watch where you're going, Potter. Sorry, Professor. I've just been looking for you in the Gryffindor common room. Well, here it is. We've done everything we can think of, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it at all. You've got a very good friend somewhere, Potter. Harry's jaw dropped. She was holding out his firebolt, and it looked as magnificent as ever. I can have it back, Harry said weakly. Seriously? Seriously, said Professor McGonagall, and she was actually smiling. I dare say you'll need to get the feel of it before Saturday's match, won't you? And Potter, do try to win, won't you? Or we'll be out of the running for the 8th year in a row, as Professor Snape was kind enough to remind me only last night. Speechless, Harry carried the firebolt back upstairs towards Gryffindor Tower. As he turned a corner, he saw Ron dashing toward him, grinning ear from ear. She gave it to you. Excellent. Listen, can I have a go on it tomorrow? Yeah, anything, said Harry, his heart lighter than it had been in a month. You know what? We should make up with Hermione. She was only trying to help. Yeah, all right, said Ron. She's in the common room now, working for a change. They turned the corridor to Gryffindor Tower and saw Neville Longbottom pleading with Sir Cadogan, who seemed to be refusing him entrance. I wrote them down, Neville was saying tearfully, but I must have dropped them somewhere. A likely tale, roared Sir Cadogan. Then spotting Harry and Ron, Good evening, my fine young yeomen. Come clap this loon in the irons. He's trying to force entry to the chambers within. Oh, shut up, said Ron, as he and Harry drew level with Neville. I've lost the passwords, Neville told them miserably. I made him tell me what passwords he was going to use this week, because he keeps changing them, and now I don't know what I've done with them. Odds bodikins, said Harry to Sir Cadogan, who looked extremely disappointed and reluctantly swung forward to let them into the common room. There was a sudden, excited murmur as every head turned, and the next moment Harry was surrounded with people exclaiming over his firebolt. "Where'd you get it, Harry? Will you let me have a go? Have you ridden it yet, Harry? Ravenclaw will have no chance. They're all on clean sweep 7s. Can I just hold it, Harry?" After 10 minutes or so, during which the firebolt was passed around and admired from every angle, the crowd dispersed, and Harry and Ron had a clear view of Hermione, the only person who hadn't rushed over to them, bent over her work and carefully avoiding their eyes. Harry and Ron approached her table, and at last she looked up. "I got it back," said Harry, grinning at her and holding up the firebolt. "See, Hermione, there wasn't anything wrong with it," said Ron. "Well, there might have been," said Hermione. "I mean, at least you know now that it's safe." "Yeah, I suppose so," said Harry. "I'd better put it upstairs." "I'll take it," said Ron eagerly. "I've got to give Scabbers his rat tonic." He took the firebolt and, holding it as if it were made of glass, carried it away up the boys' staircase. "Can I sit down then?" Harry asked Hermione. "I suppose so," said Hermione, moving a great stack of parchment off a chair. Harry looked around at the cluttered table, at the long arithmancy essay on which the ink was still glistening, and the even longer Muggle Studies essay, Explain Why Muggles Need Electricity, and at the rune translation Hermione was now poring over. "How are you getting through all this stuff?" Harry asked her. "Oh, well, you know, working hard," said Hermione. Close up, Harry saw that she looked almost as tired as Lupin. "Why don't you just drop a couple of subjects?" Harry asked, watching her lifting books as she searched for her rune dictionary. "I couldn't do that," said Hermione, looking scandalized. "Arithmancy looks terrible," said Harry, picking up the very complicated-looking number chart. "Oh no, it's wonderful," said Hermione earnestly. "It's my favorite subject. It's..." But exactly what was so wonderful about arithmancy, Harry never found out. At that precise moment, a strangled yell echoed down the boys' staircase. The whole common room fell silent, staring, petrified at the entrance. Then came hurried footsteps, growing louder and louder. Then came Ron, leaping into view, dragging with him a bedsheet. "Look!" he bellowed, striding over to Hermione's table. "Look!" he yelled, shaking the sheets in her face. "Ron, what?" "Scabbers! Look! Scabbers!" Hermione was leaning away from Ron, looking utterly bewildered. Harry looked down at the sheet Ron was holding. There was something red on it. Something that looked horribly like blood! Ron yelled into the stunned silence. "He's gone, and do you know what was on the floor?" "No," said Hermione in a trembling voice. Ron threw something down onto Hermione's rune translation. Hermione and Harry leaned forward. Lying on top of the weird, spiky shapes were several long ginger cat hairs. End of chapter 12. Am I still having fun reading the books, or is it sometimes a little difficult for me to motivate? Just asking. I'm like pacing it out in a way where it's fun, but yeah, I don't want to just like non-stop marathon them because that gets like tiring. And no, I'm having fun reading today. I don't have a ton of fun in my life lately though, so I don't know. This is just something that I have in my life that's kind of good, is these readings, so I enjoy. Oh damn. Okay, that's a good name to be honest. So Professor Vector of Arithmancy, which has something to do with complicated numbers. That's kind of interesting. Sounds kind of like vector math or something. Who knows? I'm not sure what arithmancy is in the Harry Potter universe. I would actually like to know what it is. Actually, I guess we could look it up on Pottermore or Harry Potter Wiki or something. So arithmancy, Harry Potter. Oh yeah, uh, so okay, this wiki article, it says there's something called Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, which gives information about what divination actually is. I don't even know what Hogwarts Mystery is. What is that? That is a video game from 2018. Okay. Dang. So I guess there was a Harry Potter game in 2018, and it features arithmancy. And this article also opens with a Hermione quote: "If being good at divination means I have to pretend to see death omens in a lump of tea leaves, I'm not sure I'll be studying it much longer. That lesson was absolute rubbish compared with my arithmancy class." So that was a quote we already read earlier in Prisoner of Azkaban. Arithmancy was a magical discipline that studied the magical properties of numbers, including predicting the future with numbers and numerology. Those who study and practice arithmancy were called arithmancers. Homework assignments which include writing essays that required the consultation and or composition of complex numerical charts. Notable people who discovered the magical properties of numbers and of the number 7 in the 13th century. Taught arithmancy, studied arithmancy, which is her favorite subject. Arithmancy texts, The New Theory of Numerology, Numerology and Grammatica. Arithmancer and arithmancy come from the Greek arithmos, meaning number, and manteia, meaning divination, so like number divination. So arithmancy literally means number divination. So there's divination class and then number divination, which Hermione much preferred. In the real world, arithmancy refers to a supposed form of divination based on assigning numerical values to words or phrases. The term numerology, different beliefs in a divine or mystical relationship between number and coinciding events. Hermione didn't like divination because there was a lot of guesswork. On the other hand, she proclaimed arithmancy, in which numerology, a term that in reality refers to any belief in the divine or mystical relationship between a number and one or more coinciding events, is her favorite subject. While this may seem contradictory at first, a likely explanation is that arithmancy applies a more rigorous and mathematical approach to predicting the future, which the scientifically inclined Hermione would respond well to. In Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, Murphy McNulty was known to accurately predict the outcome of certain events by calculating the probability of them taking place. The concept of probability, the estimated chance of success of an attempted Quidditch strategy, or the behavior of his fellow students, is the wizarding equivalent to mathematics and given its predictive capabilities. Presumably used arithmancy in order to calculate probability. Okay. So it's about probability prediction and math, numbers, and magics. Somehow magic. Anyway, I was just curious. And interesting that the professor is named Professor Vector, right? That seems fitting as well. Oh, the movie Pi. Yeah, good movie. It's a good movie. Yeah, I mean, when I was doing game fun stuff, like fun stuff with game dev engine stuff, I mean, to me, some of the most fun I had was actually doing camera programming, which was a whole bunch of 3D vectors and sometimes 2D vector operations. I mean, obviously there's the concept of the matrix involved with the camera, but usually I'm just only thinking in terms of 2D or 3D vectors, and I found that really fun. I actually really enjoyed that. So I don't know, maybe well, I don't know, just I don't know, when I saw the name Professor Vector, it made me want to look that up. Just curious. Anyway, let's continue on. Chapter 13, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. So here we have the very key Quidditch match that could determine the outcome of who wins the Quidditch Cup. Chapter 13, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. It looked like the end of Ron and Hermione's friendship. Each was so angry with the other that Harry couldn't see how they'd ever make up. Ron was enraged that Hermione had never taken Crookshanks' attempts to eat Scabbers seriously, hadn't bothered to keep a close enough watch on him, and was still trying to pretend that Crookshanks was innocent by suggesting that Ron look for Scabbers under all the boys' beds. Hermione, meanwhile, maintained fiercely that Ron had no proof that Crookshanks had eaten Scabbers, that the ginger hairs might have been there since Christmas, and that Ron had been prejudiced against her cat ever since Crookshanks had landed on Ron's head in the magical menagerie. Personally, Harry was sure that Crookshanks had eaten Scabbers, and when he tried to point out to Hermione that the evidence all pointed that way, she lost her temper with Harry too. "Okay, side with Ron. I knew you would," she said shrilly. "First the firebolt, now Scabbers. Everything is my fault, isn't it? Just leave me alone, Harry. I've got a lot of work to do." Ron had taken the loss of his rat very hard indeed. "Come on, Ron. You're always saying how boring Scabbers was," said Fred bracingly. "And he's been off color for ages. He was wasting away. It was probably better for him to snuff it quickly. One swallow. He probably didn't feel a thing." "Fred," said Ginny indignantly. "All he did was eat and sleep, Ron. You said it yourself," said George. "He bit Goyle for us once," Ron said miserably. "Remember, Harry?" "Yeah, that's true," said Harry. "His finest hour," said Fred, unable to keep a straight face. "Let the scar on Goyle's finger stand as the lasting tribute to his memory. Oh, come on, Ron. Get yourself down to Hogsmeade and buy a new rat. What's the point of moaning?" In a last-ditch attempt to clear Ron up, Harry persuaded him to come along to the Gryffindor's final team practice before the Ravenclaw match, so that he could have a ride on the firebolt after they'd finished. This did seem to take Ron's mind off Scabbers for a moment. "Great, can I try to shoot a few goals on it?" So they set off for the Gryffindor field together. Madam Hooch, who was still overseeing Gryffindor practices to keep an eye on Harry, was just as impressed with the firebolt as everyone else had been. She took it in her hands before takeoff and gave them the benefit of her professional opinion. "Look at the balance on it. If the Nimbus series has a fault, it's a slight list to the tail end. You often find they develop a drag after a few years. They've updated the handle too, a bit slimmer than the clean sweeps. Reminds me of the old silver arrows. A pity they've stopped making them. I learned to fly on one. A very fine old broom it was too." She continued in the same vein for some time, until Wood said, Madam Hooch, is it okay if Harry has the firebolt back? We need to practice." "Oh, right. Here you are then, Potter," said Madam Hooch. "I'll sit over here with Weasley." She and Ron left the field to sit in the stadium, and the Gryffindor team gathered around Wood for his final instructions for tomorrow's match. "Harry, I've just found out who Gryffindor is playing as Seeker. It's Cho Chang. She's a 4th year, and she's pretty good. I really hope she wouldn't be fit. She's got some problems with injuries." Wood scowled his displeasure that Cho Chang had made a full recovery, and then said, "On the other hand, she rides a Comet 260, which is going to look like a joke next to the firebolt." He gave Harry's broom a look of fervent admiration, then said, "Okay, everyone, let's go." At long last, Harry mounted his firebolt and kicked off from the ground. It was better than he'd ever dreamed. The firebolt turned with the lightest touch. It seemed to obey his thoughts rather than his grip. It sped across the field at such speed that the stadium turned into a green and gray blur. Harry turned it so sharply that Alicia Spinnet screamed. Then he went into a perfectly controlled dive, brushing the grassy field with his toes before rising 30, 40, 50 feet into the air again. "Harry, I'm letting the snitch out," Wood called. Harry turned and raced a bludger towards the goal post. He outstripped it easily, saw the snitch dart out from behind Wood, and within 10 seconds had caught it tightly in his hand. The team cheered madly. Harry let the snitch go again, gave it a minute's head start, and then tore after it, weaving in and out of the others. He He spotted it lurking near Katie Bell's knee, looped her easily, and caught it again. It was the best practice ever. The team, inspired by the presence of the firebolt in their midst, performed their best moves faultlessly, and by the time they hit the ground again, Wood didn't have a single criticism to make, which, as George Weasley pointed out, was a first. "I can't see what's going to stop us tomorrow," said Wood. "Not unless... Harry, you've sorted out your Dementor problem, haven't you?" "Yeah," said Harry, thinking of his feeble Patronus and wishing it were stronger. "The Dementors won't turn up again, Oliver. Dumbledore will go ballistic," said Fred confidently. "Well, let's hope not," said Wood. "Anyway, good work, everyone. Let's get back to the tower. Turn in early." "I'll be staying for a bit. Ron wants to go on the firebolt," Harry told Wood. And while the rest of the team headed off to the locker rooms, Harry strode over to Ron, who vaulted the barrier to the stands and came to meet him. Madam Hooch had fallen asleep in her seat. "Here you go," said Harry, handing Ron the firebolt. Ron, an expression of ecstasy in his face, mounted the broom and zoomed off into the gathering darkness, while Harry walked around the edge of the field, watching him. Night had fallen before Madam Hooch awoke with a start, told Harry and Ron off for not waking her, and insisted that they go back to the castle. Harry shouldered the firebolt, and he and Ron walked out of the shadowy stadium, discussing the firebolt's superbly smooth action, its phenomenal acceleration, and its pinpoint turning. They were halfway toward the castle when Harry, glancing to his left, saw something that made his heart turn over. A pair of eyes gleaming out of the darkness. Harry stopped dead, his heart banging against his ribs. "What's the matter?" said Ron. Harry pointed. Ron pulled out his wand and muttered, "Lumos." A beam of light fell across the grass, hit the bottom of a tree, and illuminated its branches. There, crouching among the budding leaves, was Crookshanks. "Get out of here!" Ron roared, and then stooped down and seized a stone lying on the grass. But before he could do anything else, Crookshanks had vanished with one swish of his long ginger tail. "See?" Ron said furiously, chucking the stone down again. "She's still letting him wander around wherever he wants. Probably washing down Scabbers with a couple of birds now." Harry didn't say anything. He took a deep breath as relief seeped through him. He had been sure for a moment that those eyes had belonged to the Grim. They set off to the castle once more. Slightly ashamed of this moment of panic, Harry didn't say anything to Ron, nor did he look left or right until they had reached the well-lit entrance hall. Harry went down to breakfast the next morning with the rest of the boys in his dormitory, all of whom seemed to think the firebolt deserved some sort of guard of honor. As Harry entered the great hall, heads turned in the direction of the firebolts, and there was a good deal of excited muttering. Harry saw, with enormous satisfaction, that the Slytherin team were all looking thunderstruck. "Did you see his face?" said Ron gleefully, looking back at Malfoy. "He can't believe it. This is brilliant." Wood, too, was basking in the reflected glory of the firebolt. "Put it here, Harry," he said, laying the broom in the middle of the table and carefully turning it so that its name faced upward. People from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables were soon coming over to look. Cedric Diggory came over to congratulate Harry on having acquired such a superb replacement for his Nimbus, and Percy's Ravenclaw girlfriend, Penelope Clearwater, asked if she could actually hold the firebolt. Now, Penny, no sabotage," said Percy heartily as she examined the firebolt closely. "Penelope and I have got a bet on," he told the team. 10 galleons on the outcome of the match." Penelope put the firebolt down again, thanked Harry, and went back to her table. "Harry, make sure you win," said Percy in an urgent whisper. "I haven't got 10 galleons. "Yes, I'm coming, Penny," and he bustled off to join her in a piece of toast. "Sure you can manage that broom, Potter," said a cold, drawling voice. Draco Malfoy had arrived for a closer look, Crabbe and Goyle right behind him. "Yeah, reckon so," said Harry casually. "Got plenty of special features, hasn't it?" said Malfoy, his eyes glittering maliciously. "Shame it doesn't come with a parachute, in case you get too near a Dementor." Crabbe and Goyle sniggered. "Pity you can't attach an extra arm to yours, Malfoy," said Harry. "Then it could catch the snitch for you." The Gryffindor team laughed loudly. Malfoy's pale eyes narrowed, and he stalked away. They watched him rejoin the rest of the Slytherin team, who put their heads together, no doubt asking Malfoy whether Harry's broom really was a firebolt. At 11:15, the Gryffindor team set off for the locker rooms. The weather couldn't have been more different from their match against Hufflepuff. It was a clear, cool day with a very light breeze. There would be no visibility problems this time, and Harry, though nervous, was starting to feel the excitement only a Quidditch match could bring. They could hear the rest of the school moving into the stadium beyond. Harry took off his black school robes, removed his wand from his pocket, and stuck it inside the t-shirt he was going to wear under his Quidditch robes. He only hoped he wouldn't need it. He wondered suddenly whether Professor Lupin was in the crowd, watching. "You know what we've got to do," said Wood, as they prepared to leave the locker rooms. "If we lose this match, we're out of the running. Just fly like you did in practice yesterday, and we'll be okay." They walked out onto the field to tumultuous applause. The Ravenclaw team, dressed in blue, were already standing in the middle of the field. Their seeker, Cho Chang, was the only girl on their team. She was shorter than Harry by about a head, and Harry couldn't help noticing, nervous as he was, that she was extremely pretty. She smiled at Harry as the teams faced each other beyond the captains, and he felt a slight lurch in the region of his stomach that he didn't think had anything to do with nerves. "Wood, Davies, shake hands," Madam Hooch said briskly, and Wood shook hands with the Ravenclaw captain. "Mount your brooms. On my whistle. 3, 2, 1. Harry kicked off into the air, and the firebolt zoomed higher and faster than any other broom. He soared around the stadium and began squinting around for the snitch, listening all the while to the commentary, which was being provided by the Weasley twins' friend, Lee Jordan. "They're off, and the big excitement this match is the firebolt that Harry Potter is riding for Gryffindor. According to Which Broomstick, the firebolt's going to be the broom of choice for the Nationals team at this year's World Championship." "Jordan, would you mind telling us what's going on in the match?" interrupted Professor McGonagall's voice. "Right you are, Professor. I'm just giving a bit of background information. The firebolt, incidentally, has a built-in auto brake, and..." "Jordan!" "Oh, okay. Gryffindor in possession. Katie Bell of Gryffindor heading for the goal." Harry streaked past Katie in the opposite direction, gazing around for a glint of gold and noticing that Cho Chang was tailing him closely. She was undoubtedly a very good flyer. She kept cutting across him, forcing him to change direction. "Show her your acceleration, Harry," Fred yelled as he whooshed past in pursuit of a bludger that was aiming for Alicia. Harry urged the firebolt forward as they rounded the Ravenclaw goalpost, and Cho fell behind. Just as Katie succeeded in scoring the first goal of the match, and the Ravenclaw end of the field went wild, he saw it. The snitch was close to the ground, flitting near one of the barriers. Harry dived. Cho saw what he was doing and tore after him. Harry was speeding up, excitement flooding him. Dives were his specialty. He was 10 feet away. Then a bludger, hit by one of the Ravenclaw beaters, came pelting out of nowhere. Harry veered off course, avoiding it by an inch, and in those few crucial seconds, the snitch had vanished. There was a great ooh of disappointment from the Gryffindor supporters, but much applause for the beater from Ravenclaw end. For their beater from the Ravenclaw end. George Weasley vented his feelings by hitting the second bludger directly at the offending beater, who was forced to roll right over in the air to avoid it. Gryffindor leads by 80 points to 0, and look at that firebolt goal go. Potter's really putting it through its paces now. See it turn. Chang's Comet is just no match for it. The firebolt's precision balance is really noticeable in these long... "Jordan, are you being paid to advertise firebolts? Get on with the commentary." Ravenclaw was pulling back. They had now scored 3 goals, which put Gryffindor only 50 points ahead. If Cho got the snitch before him, Ravenclaw would win. Harry dropped lower, narrowly avoiding a Ravenclaw chaser, scanning the field frantically. A glint of gold, a flutter of tiny wings. The snitch was circling the Gryffindor goalpost. Harry accelerated, eyes fixed on the speck of gold ahead, but just then Cho appeared out of thin air, blocking him. "Harry, this is no time to be a gentleman," Wood roared as Harry swerved to avoid a collision. "Knock her off her broom if you have to." Harry turned and caught sight of Cho. She was grinning. The snitch had vanished again. Harry turned his firebolt upward and was soon 20 feet above the game. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Cho following him. She decided to mark him rather than search for the snitch herself. All right then, if she wanted to tail him, she'd have to take the consequences. He dived again, and Cho, thinking he'd seen the snitch, tried to follow. Harry pulled out of the dive very sharply. She hurled downward. He rose fast as a bullet once more, and then saw it for the third time. The snitch was glittering way above the field at the Ravenclaw end. He accelerated. So many feet below did Cho. He was winning, gaining on the snitch with every second. Then, "Oh!" screamed Cho, pointing. Distracted, Harry looked down. 3 Dementors, 3 tall, black-hooded Dementors, were looking up at him. He didn't stop to think. Plunging a hand down the neck of his robes, he whipped out his wand and roared, "Expecto Patronum!" Something silver-white, something enormous, erupted from the end of his wand. He knew it had shot directly at the Dementors, but didn't pause to watch. His mind was still miraculously clear. He looked ahead. He was nearly there. He stretched out the hand still grasping his wand, and just managed to close his fingers over the small, struggling snitch. Madame Hooch's whistle sounded. Harry turned around in midair and saw 6 scarlet blurs bearing down on him. Next moment, the whole team was hugging him so hard he was nearly pulled off his broom. Down below, he could hear the roars of the Gryffindors in the crowd. "That's my boy," Wood kept yelling. Alicia, Angelina, and Katie had all kissed Harry. Fred had him in a grip so tight, Harry felt as though his head would come off. In complete disarray, the team managed to make its way back to the ground. Harry got off his broom and looked up to see a gaggle of Gryffindor supporters sprinting onto the field, Ron in the lead. Before he knew it, he had been engulfed by the cheering crowd. "Yes!" Ron yelled, yanking Harry's arm into the air. "Yes! Yes!" "Well done, Harry," said Percy, looking delighted. 10 galleons to me. Must find Penelope. Excuse me." "Good for you, Harry," roared Seamus Finnegan. "Ruddy brilliant," boomed Hagrid, over the heads of the milling Gryffindors. "That was quite some Patronus," said a voice in Harry's ear. Harry turned around to see Professor Lupin, who looked both shaken and pleased. "The Dementors didn't affect me at all," Harry said excitedly. "I didn't feel a thing." "That would be because they, weren't Dementors," said Professor Lupin. "Come and see." He led Harry out of the crowd until they were able to see the edge of the field. "You gave Mr. Malfoy quite a fright," said Lupin. Harry stared. Lying in a crumpled heap on the ground were Malfoy, Crabbe, Goyle, and Marcus Flint, the Slytherin team captain, all struggling to remove themselves from the long, black, hooded robes. It looked as though Malfoy had been standing on Goyle's shoulders. Standing over them, with an expression of utmost fury on her face, was Professor McGonagall. "An unworthy trick," she was shouting. "A low and cowardly attempt to sabotage the Gryffindor Seeker. Detention for all of you, and 50 points from Slytherin. I shall be speaking to Professor Dumbledore about this, make no mistake. Ah, here he comes now." If anything could have set the seal on Gryffindor's victory, it was this. Ron, who had fought his way through to Harry's side, doubled up with laughter as they watched Malfoy fighting to extricate himself from the robe, Goyle's head still stuck inside it. "Come on, Harry," said George, fighting his way over. "Party! Gryffindor common room, now." "Right," said Harry, and feeling happier than he had in ages. He and the rest of the team led the way, still in their scarlet robes, out of the stadium and back up to the castle. It felt as though they had already won the Quidditch Cup. The party went on all day and well into the night. Fred and George Weasley disappeared for a couple of hours and returned with armfuls of bottles of butterbeer, pumpkin fizz, and several bags full of Honeydukes sweets. "How did you do that?" squealed Angelina Johnson, as George started throwing peppermint toads into the crowd. "With a little help from Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs," Fred muttered in Harry's ear. Only one person wasn't joining in the festivities. Hermione, incredibly, was sitting in a corner, attempting to read an enormous book entitled Home Life and Social Habits of British Muggles. Harry broke away from the table where Fred and George had started juggling butterbeer bottles and went over to her. "Did you even come to the match?" he asked her. "Of course I did," said Hermione in a strangely high-pitched voice, not looking up. And I'm very glad we won, and I think you did really well, but I need to read this by Monday. Come on, Hermione. Come and have some food, Harry said, looking over at Ron and wondering whether he was in a good enough mood to bury the hatchet. I can't, Harry. I've still got 422 pages to read, said Hermione, now sounding slightly hysterical. Anyway, she glanced over at Ron, too. He doesn't want me to join in. There was no arguing with this, as Ron chose that moment to say loudly, if Scabbers hadn't just been eaten, he could have had some of these fudge flies. He used to really like them. Hermione burst into tears. Before Harry could say or do anything, she tucked the enormous book under her arm and, still sobbing, ran towards the staircase to the girls' dormitories and out of sight. Can't you give her a break? Harry asked Ron quietly. No, said Ron flatly. If she just acted like she was sorry, but she'll never admit she's wrong, Hermione. She's still acting like Scabbers has gone on vacation or something. The Gryffindor party ended only when Professor McGonagall turned up in her tartan dressing gown and hairnets at 1 a.m. to insist that they all go to bed. Harry and Ron climbed the stairs to their dormitory, still discussing the match. At last, exhausted, Harry climbed into bed, twitched the hangings of his four-poster shut to block out a ray of moonlight, lay back, and felt himself almost instantly drifting off to sleep. He had a very strange dream. He was walking through a forest, his firebolt over his shoulder, following something silvery white. It was winding its way through the trees ahead, and he could only catch glimpses of it between the leaves. Anxious to catch up with it, he sped up, but as he moved faster, so did his quarry. Harry broke into a run, and ahead he heard hooves gathering speed. Now he was running flat out, and ahead he could hear galloping. Then he turned a corner into a clearing, and... no! Harry woke as suddenly as though he'd been hit in the face. Disoriented in the total darkness, he fumbled with his hangings. He could hear movements around him, and Seamus Finnegan's voice from the other side of the room. What's going on? Harry thought he heard the dormitory door slam. At last, finding the divide in his curtains, he ripped them back, and at the same moment, Dean Thomas lit his lamp. Ron was sitting up in his bed, the hangings torn from one side, a look of utmost terror on his face. Black! Sirius Black, with a knife. What? Here, just now, slashed the curtains, woke me up. You sure you weren't dreaming, Ron? Said Dean. Look at the curtains! I tell you, he was here. They all scrambled out of bed. Harry reached the dormitory door first, and they sprinted back down the staircase. Doors opened behind them, and sleepy voices called after them. Who shouted? What are you doing? The common room was lit with the glow of the dying fire, still littered with the debris from the party. It was deserted. You sure you weren't dreaming, Ron? I'm telling you, I saw him. What's all the noise? Professor McGonagall told us to go to bed. A few of the girls had come down their staircase, pulling on dressing gowns and yawning. Boys, too, were reappearing. Excellent. Are we carrying on? Said Fred Weasley brightly. Everyone back upstairs, said Percy, hurrying into the common room and pinning his headboy badge to his pajamas as he spoke. Pierce, Sirius Black, said Ron faintly, in our dormitory, with a knife, woke me up. The common room went very still. Nonsense, said Percy, looking startled. You've had too much to eat, Ron. Had a nightmare. I'm telling you. Now, really, enough's enough. Professor McGonagall was back. She slammed the portrait behind her as she entered the common room and stared furiously around. I am delighted that Gryffindor won the match, but this is really getting ridiculous. Percy, I expected better of you. I certainly didn't authorize this, Professor, said Percy, puffing himself up indignantly. I was just telling them all to get back to bed. My brother Ron had a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Ron yelled. Professor, I woke up and Sirius Black was standing over me, holding a knife. Professor McGonagall stared at him. Don't be ridiculous, Weasley. How could you possibly have gotten through the portrait hole? Ask him, said Ron, pointing a shaking finger at the back of Sir Cadogan's picture. Ask him if he saw. Glaring suspiciously at Ron, Professor McGonagall pushed the portrait back open and went outside. The whole common room listened with bated breath. Sir Cadogan, did you just let a man enter Gryffindor Tower? Certainly, good lady, yelled Sir Cadogan. There's a stunned silence, both inside and outside the common room. You did, said Professor McGonagall. But the password. He had 'em, said Sir Cadogan proudly. Had the whole week's, milady. Read them off a little piece of paper. Professor McGonagall pulled herself back through the portrait hole to face the stunned crowd. She was white as chalk. Which person, she said, her voice shaking, which abysmally foolish person wrote down this week's passwords and left them lying around? There was utter silence, broken by the smallest of terrified squeaks. Neville Longbottom, trembling from head to fluffy slippered toes, raised his hands slowly in the air. End of chapter 13? Yeah. So Neville's passwords list went missing, and somehow Sirius Black seemed to have obtained it and literally got up into the boys' dormitory and slashed the curtains. And insane, right? How could that have happened? What is going on? I guess we'll find out. A whole chapter about the match. Of course, that is missing in the movie as well. I see. Yeah, as stated before, I don't know the movies, so I don't know what's missing. I just know a lot is missing. It's kind of irrelevant. It could have been cut. Yeah, so that match was like... That Quidditch match was basically like... It was like Harry getting the firebolt back just in time. Lots of training. Hermione working hard on all her classes. And then the match. And then actually, technically, that's the first time Cho Chang has showed up in the entire series. That's the first time Cho Chang was mentioned. So her character suddenly exists now. And we also get the Slytherins trying to throw off Harry by dressing as Dementors, which didn't work because the actual aura of the Dementor is what actually gets Harry, not the look of the robes or whatever, right? So, you know, the Slytherins got into detention, and Harry did get the snitch, and there was a lot of partying, and there was something strange with, like, Harry thought he saw the Grim, and then there was Crookshanks again, and then a party, and Hermione working, and then Ron and Hermione's friendship still not being mended, and then the Sirius Black encounter. I guess that's what that chapter was. But yeah, I mean, the match itself, probably not too relevant, I guess, if you're going to make a 2-hour movie. I don't know. Alright. So, wasn't it so that Harry didn't even get the firebolt until the end of the movie? I don't know, maybe. I don't know, but I think you're right. You get it from a special person in a package. No spoilers. I love the Quidditch matches. I'm not a big fan of the sport of Quidditch just because it feels like a huge percentage of the Quidditch matches are won by whoever gets the snitch, which sort of like, I don't know, it just puts such a, well, it's just like a very skewed sport where the seeker matters like a lot. I mean, there's other stuff though, like there's beaters disrupting the seeker, right? Like that happened in that match. Like Harry found it, was diving, and then a bludger got pelted. So like, that's cool, but like, it's just like places so much emphasis on the snitch that I don't think I'm a huge fan of the sport, to be honest. But, you know, I do like the little like kind of like almost radio like commentary or whatever from Dean Thomas, was it? I kind of like that stuff. All right, let's go. We got chapter 14 now. Snape's Grudge. Yeah. Yuck. Indeed. That hasn't happened yet. Chapter 14. Snape's Grudge. Oh, and this is an illustration of Snape, maybe, which looks very odd. That's not how I picture Snape, really. I don't know how much I like... Is that Snape? I think that's Snape. Yeah, that's weird. I don't picture Snape in that way. I don't know. Anyway, Snape's grudge. No one in Gryffindor Tower slept that night. They knew that the castle was being searched again, and the whole house stayed awake in the common room, waiting to hear whether Black had been caught. Professor McGonagall came back at dawn to tell them that he had again escaped. Throughout the day, everywhere they went, they saw signs of tighter security. Professor Flitwick could be seen teaching the front doors to recognize the large picture of Sirius Black. Filch was suddenly bustling up and down the corridors, boarding up everything from tiny cracks in the walls to mouse holes. Sir Cadogan had been fired. His portrait had been taken back to his lonely landing on the 7th floor, and the fat lady was back. She had been expertly restored, but was still extremely nervous, and had agreed to return to her job, but only on the condition she was given extra protection. A bunch of surly security trolls had been hired to guard her. They paced the corridor in a menacing group, talking in grunts and comparing the size of their clubs. Harry couldn't help noticing that the statue of the One-Eyed Witch on the 3rd floor remained unguarded and unblocked. It seemed that Fred and George had been right in thinking that they, and now Harry, Ron, and Hermione, were the only ones who knew about the hidden passageway within it. "Do you reckon we should tell someone?" Harry asked Ron. "We know he's not coming in through Honeydukes," said Ron dismissively. "We'd have heard if the shop had been broken into." Harry was glad Ron took this view. If the One-Eyed Witch was boarded up too, he would never be able to go into Hogsmeade again. Ron had become an instant celebrity. For the first time in his life, people were paying more attention to him than to Harry, and it was clear that Ron was rather enjoying the experience. Though still severely shaken by the night's events, he was happy to tell anyone who asked what had happened, with a wealth of detail. "I was asleep, and I heard this ripping noise, and I thought it was in my dream, you know? But then there was this draft. I woke up and one side of the hangings on my bed had been pulled down. I rolled over, and I saw him standing over me, like a skeleton, with loads of filthy hair, holding this great long knife. Must have been 12 inches. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and then I yelled, and he scampered." "Why, though?" Ron asked to Harry, as the group of second-year girls who had been listening to his chilling tale departed. "Why did he run?" Harry had been wondering the same thing. Why had Black, having gone to the wrong bed, not silenced Ron and proceeded to Harry? Black had proved 12 years ago that he didn't mind murdering innocent people, and this time he had been facing 5 unarmed boys, 4 of whom were asleep. "He must have known he'd have a job getting back out of the castle once you'd yelled and woken people up," said Harry thoughtfully. "He'd have had to kill the whole house to get back through the portrait hole, and then he would have met the teachers." Neville was in total disgrace. Professor McGonagall was so furious with him, she had banned him from all future Hogsmeade visits, given him a detention, and forbidden anyone to give him the password into the tower. Poor Neville was forced to wait outside the common room every night for someone to come let him in, while the security trolls leered unpleasantly at him. None of these punishments, however, came close to matching the one his grandmother had in store for him. 2 days after Black's break-in, she sent Neville the very worst thing a Hogwarts student could receive over breakfast: a howler. The school's owls swooped into the great hall, carrying the mail as usual, and Neville choked as a huge barn owl landed in front of him, a scarlet envelope clutched in its beak. Harry and Ron, who were sitting opposite him, recognized the letter as a howler at once. Ron had gotten one from his mother the year before. "Run for it, Neville," Ron advised. Neville didn't need telling twice. He seized the envelope and, holding it before him like a bomb, sprinted out of the hall, while the Slytherin table exploded with laughter at the sight of him. They heard the howler go off in the entrance hall, Neville's grandmother's voice, magically magnified to 100 times its usual volume, shrieking about he had brought shame on the whole family. Harry was too busy feeling sorry for Neville to notice immediately that he had a letter too. Hedwig got his attention by nipping him sharply on the wrist. "Ouch! Oh, thanks, Hedwig." Harry tore open the envelope while Hedwig helped herself to some of Neville's cornflakes. The note inside said, "Dear Harry and Ron, how about having tea with me this afternoon around 6? I'll come and collect you from the castle. Wait for me in the entrance hall. You're not allowed to go out on your own. Cheers, Hagrid." "He probably wants to hear all about Black," said Ron. So, at 6 o'clock that afternoon, Harry and Ron left the Gryffindor Tower, passed the security trolls at a run, and headed down to the entrance hall. Hagrid was already waiting for them. "All right, Hagrid," said Ron. "Suppose you want to hear about Saturday night, do you?" "I've already heard all about it," said Hagrid, opening the front doors and leaving them outside. "Oh," said Ron, looking slightly put out. The first thing they saw on entering Hagrid's cabin was Buckbeak, who was stretched out on top of Hagrid's patchwork quilt, his enormous wings folded tight to his body, enjoying a large plate of dead ferrets. Averting his eyes from this unpleasant sight, Harry saw a gigantic, hairy brown suit and very horrible yellow and orange tie hanging from the top of Hagrid's wardrobe door. "What are they for, Hagrid?" said Harry. "Buckbeak's case against the Committee for the Disposal o' Dangerous Creatures," said Hagrid. "This Friday. Him and me'll be going down to London together. I've booked 2 beds on the night bus." Harry felt a nasty pang of guilt. He had completely forgotten that Buckbeak's trial was so near, and judging by the uneasy look on Ron's face, he had too. They had also forgotten their promise about helping him prepare Buckbeak's defense. The arrival of the firebolt had driven it clean out of their minds. Hagrid poured them tea and offered them a plate of bath buns, but they knew better than to accept. They had too much experience with Hagrid's cooking. "I got something to discuss with you two," said Hagrid, sitting himself between them and looking uncharacteristically serious. "What?" said Harry. "Hermione," said Hagrid. "What about her?" said Ron. "She's in a right state, that's what. She been coming down to visit me a lot since Christmas. Been feeling lonely. First you weren't talking to her because of the firebolt, and now you're not talking to her because of her cat." "8 scabbers," interjected angrily. "Because her cat acted like all cats do." Hagrid continued doggedly. "She cried a fair few times, you know. Going through a rough time at the moment. Bitten off more'n she can chew, if you ask me, all the work she's trying to do. Still found time to help me with Buckbeak's case, mind. She found some really good stuff for me. Reckon he'll stand a good chance now." "Hagrid, we should have helped as well. Sorry," Harry began awkwardly. "I'm not blaming you," said Hagrid, waving Harry's apology aside. "God knows you've had enough to be getting on with. I see you practicing Quidditch every hour of the day and night. But I gotta tell you, I thought you two'd value your friend more than broomsticks or rats, that's all." Harry and Ron exchanged uncomfortable looks. "Really upset she was when Black nearly stabbed you, Ron. She's got her heart in the right place, Hermione has, and you two not talking to her." "If she'd get rid of that cat, I'd speak to her again," Ron said angrily. "But she's sticking up for it. She's a maniac, and she won't hear a word against it." "Ah, well, people can be a bit stupid about their pets," said Hagrid wisely. Behind him, Buckbeak spat a few ferret bones onto Hagrid's pillow. They spent the rest of their evening discussing Gryffindor's improved chances for the Quidditch Cup. At 9 o'clock, Hagrid walked them back up to the castle. A large group of people was bunched around the bulletin board when they returned to the common room. "Hogsmeade next weekend," said Ron, craning over the heads to read a new notice. "What do you reckon?" he added quietly to Harry as they went to sit down. "Well, Filch hasn't done anything about the passage into Honeydukes," Harry said, even more quietly. "Harry!" said a voice in his right ear. Harry started and looked around at Hermione, who was sitting at the table right behind them, and clearing a space in the wall of books that had been hiding her. "Harry, if you go into Hogsmeade again, I'll tell Professor McGonagall about that map," said Hermione. "Can you hear someone talking, Harry?" growled Ron, not looking at Hermione. "Ron, how can you let him go with you, after what Sirius Black nearly did to you? I mean it, I'll tell." "So now you're trying to get Harry expelled," said Ron furiously. "Haven't you done enough damage this year?" Hermione opened her mouth to respond, but with a soft hiss, Crookshanks leapt onto her lap. Hermione took one frightened look at the expression on Ron's face, gathered up Crookshanks, and hurried away towards the girls' dormitories. "So how about it?" Ron said to Harry, as though there had been no interruption. Come on, last time we went you didn't see anything. You haven't even been inside Zonko's yet. Harry looked around to check that Hermione was well out of earshot. Okay, he said, but I'm taking the invisibility cloak this time. On Saturday morning, Harry packed his invisibility cloak in his bag, slipped the Marauder's map into his pocket, and went down to breakfast with everyone else. Hermione kept shooting suspicious looks down the table at him, but he avoided her eye and was careful to let her see him walking back up the marble staircase in the entrance hall, as everyone else proceeded to the front doors. Bye, Harry called to Ron. See you when you get back. Ron grinned and winked. Harry hurried up to the third floor, slipping the Marauder's map out of his pocket as he went. Crouching behind the one-eyed witch, he smoothed it out. A tiny dot was moving in his direction. Harry squinted at it. The minuscule writing next to it read, Neville Longbottom. Harry quickly pulled out his wand, muttered, Descendium, and shoved his bag into the statue, but before he could climb in himself, Neville came around the corner. Harry, I forgot you weren't going to Hogsmeade either. Hi, Neville, said Harry, moving swiftly away from the statue and pushing the map back into his pocket. What are you up to? Nothing, shrugged Neville. Want a game of Exploding Snap? Not now. I was going to the library to do that vampire essay for Lupin. I'll come with you, said Neville brightly. I haven't done it either. Hang on. Yeah, I forgot. I finished it last night. Great, you can help me, said Neville, his round face anxious. I don't understand that thing about the garlic at all. Do they have to eat it, or... He broke off with a small gasp, looking over Harry's shoulder. It was Snape. Neville took a quick step behind Harry. And what are you two doing here? Said Snape, coming to a halt and looking from one to the other. An odd place to meet. To Harry's immense disquiet, Snape's black eyes flickered to the doorways on either side of them, and then to the one-eyed witch. We're not meeting here, said Harry. We just met here. Indeed, said Snape. You have a habit of turning up in unexpected places, Potter, and you are very rarely there for no reason. I suggest the pair of you return to Gryffindor Tower, where you belong. Harry and Neville set off without another word. As they turned the corner, Harry looked back. Snape was running one of his hands over the one-eyed witch's head, examining it closely. Harry managed to shake Neville off at the fat lady by telling him the password, and then pretending he left his vampire essay in the library and doubling back. Once out of sight of the security trolls, he pulled out the map again and held it close to his nose. The third-floor corridor seemed to be deserted. Harry scanned the map carefully and saw, with a leap of relief, that the tiny dot labeled Severus Snape was now back in its office. He sprinted back to the one-eyed witch, opened her hump, heaved himself inside, and slid down to meet his bag at the bottom of the stone chute. He wiped the Marauder's map blank again, then set off at a run. Harry, completely hidden beneath the invisibility cloak, emerged into the sunlight outside Honeyduke's and prodded Ron in the back. It's me, he muttered. What kept you? Ron hissed. Snape was hanging around. They set up off the high street. Where are you? Ron kept muttering out of the corner of his mouth. Are you still there? This feels weird. They went to the post office. Ron pretended to be checking the price of an owl to Bill in Egypt so that Harry could have a good look around. The owls sat hooting softly down at him, at least 300 of them, from great greys right down to tiny little Scops owls, local deliveries only, which were so small they could have sat in the palm of Harry's hand. Then they visited Zonko's, which was so packed with students Harry had to exercise great care not to tread on anyone and cause a panic. There were jokes and tricks to fulfill even Fred and George's wildest dreams. Harry gave Ron whispered orders and passed him some gold from under his cloak. They left Zonko's with their money bags considerably lighter than they had been on entering, but their pockets bulging with dung bombs, hiccup sweets, frog spawn soup, and a nose-biting teacup apiece. The day was fine and breezy, and neither of them felt like staying indoors, so they walked past the 3 broomsticks and climbed a slope to visit the Shrieking Shack, the most haunted dwelling in Britain. It stood a little way above the rest of the village, and even in daylight was slightly creepy. with its bordered windows and dank, overgrown garden. Even the Hogwarts ghosts avoid it, said Ron as they leaned on the fence, looking up at it. I asked Nearly Headless Nick. He says he's heard a very rough crowd lives here. No one can get in. Fred and George tried, obviously, but all the entrances are sealed shut. Harry, feeling hot from their climb, was just considering taking off the cloak for a few minutes when they heard voices nearby. Someone was climbing toward the house from the other side of the hill. Moments later, Malfoy had appeared, followed closely by Crabbe and Goyle. Malfoy was speaking. Should have an owl from Father any time now. He had to go to the hearing to tell him about my arm, about how I couldn't use it for 3 months. Crabbe and Goyle sniggered. I really wish I could hear that great Harry moron trying to defend himself. There's no arm in him, honest. That hippogriff's as good as dead. Malfoy caught sight of Ron. His pale face split in a malevolent grin. What are you doing, Weasley? Ron looked up at the crumbling house behind Ron. Suppose you'd love to live here, wouldn't you, Weasley? Dreaming about having your own bedroom? I've heard your family all sleep in one room. Is that true? Harry seized the back of Ron's robes to stop him from leaping on Malfoy. Leave him to me, he hissed in Ron's ear. The opportunity was too perfect to miss. Harry crept silently around behind Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, bent down, and scooped a large handful of mud out of the path. We were just discussing your friend Hagrid, Malfoy said to Ron. Just trying to imagine what he's saying to the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. Do you think he'll cry when they cut off his hippogriffs? Splat! Malfoy's head jerked around as the mud hit him. His silver blonde hair was suddenly dripping in muck. What the? Ron had to hold onto the fence to keep himself standing. He was laughing so hard. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle spun stupidly on the spot, staring wildly around. Malfoy trying to wipe his hair clean. What was that? Who did that? Very haunted up here, isn't it? Said Ron, with an air of one commenting on the weather. Crabbe and Goyle were looking scared. Their bulging muscles were no use against ghosts. Malfoy was staring madly around at the deserted landscape. Harry sneaked along the path, where a particularly sloppy puddle yielded some foul-smelling green sludge. Splatter! Crabbe and Goyle caught some this time. Goyle hopped furiously on the spot, trying to rub it out of his small, dull eyes. It came from over there, said Malfoy, wiping his face, and staring at a spot some 6 feet to the left of Harry. Crabbe blundered forward, his long arms outstretched like a zombie. Harry dodged around him, picked up a stick, and lobbed it at Crabbe's back. Harry doubled up with silent laughter as Crabbe did a kind of pirouette in midair, trying to see who had thrown it. As Ron was the only person Crabbe could see, it was Ron he started towards, but Harry stuck out his leg. Crabbe stumbled, and his huge, flat foot caught the hem of Harry's cloak. Harry felt a great tug, and then the cloak slid off his face. For a split second, Malfoy stared at him. Arg! He yelled, pointing at Harry's head. Then he turned tail and ran, at breakneck speed, back down the hill, Crabbe and Goyle behind him. Harry tugged the cloak up again, but the damage was done. Harry, Ron said, stumbling forward and staring hopelessly at the point where Harry had disappeared. You'd better run for it. If Malfoy tells anyone, you'd better get back to the castle quick. See you later, said Harry, and without another word, he tore back towards the path towards Hogsmeade. Tore back down the path towards Hogsmeade. Would Malfoy believe what he had seen? Would anyone believe Malfoy? No one knew about the invisibility cloak. Nobody except Dumbledore. Harry's stomach turned over. If Dumbledore would know exactly what had happened if Malfoy said anything. Back into Honeydukes, back down the cellar steps, across the stone floor, through the trapdoor. Harry pulled off the cloak, tucked it under his arm, and ran, flat out, along the passage. Malfoy would get back first, but how long would it take him to find a teacher? Panting, a sharp pain in his side, Harry didn't slow down until he reached the stone slide. He would have to leave the cloak where it was. It was too much of a giveaway in case Malfoy had tipped off a teacher. He had hid it in a shadowy corner, then started to climb as fast as he could, his sweaty hands slipping on the sides of the chute. He reached the inside of the witch's hump, tapped it with his wand, stuck his head through, and hoisted himself out. The hump closed, and just as Harry stepped out from behind the statue, He heard quick footsteps approaching. It was Snape. He approached Harry at a swift walk, his black robe swishing, then stopped in front of him. "So," he said. There was a look of suppressed triumph about him. Harry tried to look innocent, all too aware of his sweaty face and his muddy hands, which he quickly hid in his pockets. "Come with me, Potter," said Snape. Harry followed him downstairs, trying to wipe his hands clean on the inside of his robes without Snape noticing. They walked down the stairs to the dungeons, and then into Snape's office. Harry had been in here only once before. He had been in very serious trouble then, too. Snape had acquired a few more slimy, horrible things in jars since last time, all standing on shelves behind his desk, glinting in the firelight and adding to the threatening atmosphere. "Sit," said Snape. Harry sat. Snape, however, remained standing. "Mr. Malfoy has just been to see me with a strange story, Potter," said Snape. Harry didn't say anything. "He tells me he was up by the Shrieking Shack when he ran into Weasley, apparently alone." Still, Harry didn't speak. "Mr. Malfoy states he was standing talking to Weasley when a large amount of mud hit him in the back of his head. How do you think that could have happened?" Harry tried to look mildly surprised. "I don't know, Professor." Snape's eyes were boring into Harry's. It was exactly like trying to stare down a hippogriff. Harry tried hard not to blink. Mr. Malfoy then saw an extraordinary apparition. Can you imagine what it might have been, Potter? "No," said Harry, now trying to sound innocently curious. "It was your head, Potter, floating in midair." There was a long silence. "Maybe he'd better go to Madame Pomfrey," said Harry, "if he's seeing things like—" "What would your head have been doing in Hogsmeade, Potter?" said Snape softly. "Your head is not allowed in Hogsmeade. No part of your body has permission to be in Hogsmeade." "I know that," said Harry, striving to keep his face free of guilt or fear. "It sounds like Malfoy is not having hallucinations," snarled Snape, and he bent down, a hand on each arm of Harry's chair, so that their faces were a foot apart. "If your head was in Hogsmeade, so was the rest of you." "I've been up in Gryffindor Tower," said Harry, "like you told. Can anyone confirm that?" Harry didn't say anything. Snape's thin mouth curled into a horrible smile. "So," he said, straightening up again, "everyone from the Minister of Magic downward has been trying to keep famous Harry Potter safe from Sirius Black. But famous Harry Potter is a law unto himself. Let the ordinary people worry about his safety. Famous Harry Potter goes where he wants to, with no thought for the consequences." Harry stayed silent. Snape was trying to provoke him into telling the truth. He wasn't going to do it. Snape had no proof yet. "How extraordinarily like your father you are, Potter," Snape said suddenly, his eyes glinting. He, too, was exceedingly arrogant. A small amount of talent on the Quidditch field made him think he was a cut above the rest of us, too. Strutting around the place with his friends and admirers. The resemblance between you is uncanny. "My dad didn't strut," said Harry before he could stop himself, "and neither do I." "Your father didn't set much store by rules either," Snape went on, pressing his advantage, his thin face full of malice. "Rules were for lesser mortals, not Quidditch Cup winners." His head was so swollen. "Shut up!" Harry was suddenly on his feet. Rage, such as he had not felt since his last night in Privet Drive, was coursing through him. He didn't care that Snape's face had gone rigid, the black eyes flashing dangerously. "What did you say to me, Potter?" "I told you to shut up about my dad," Harry yelled. "I know the truth, all right. He saved your life. Dumbledore told me. You wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for my dad." Snape's sallow skin had gone the color of sour milk. "And did the headmaster tell you the circumstances in which your father saved my life?" he whispered. "Or did he consider the details too unpleasant for precious Potter's delicate ears?" Harry bit his lip. He didn't know what had happened and didn't want to admit it, but Snape seemed to have guessed the truth. "I would hate for you to run away with a false idea of your father, Potter," he said, a terrible grin twisting his face. "Have you been imagining some act of glorious heroism? Then let me correct you. Your saintly father and his friends played a highly amusing joke on me, that would have resulted in my death if your father hadn't gotten cold feet at the last moment. There was nothing brave about what he did. He was saving his own skin as much as mine. Had their joke succeeded, he would have been expelled from Hogwarts. Snape's uneven, yellowish teeth were bared. "Turn out your pockets, Potter," he spat suddenly. Harry didn't move. There was a pounding in his ears. "Turn out your pockets, or we go straight to the headmaster. Pull them out, Potter." Cold with dread, Harry slowly pulled out the bag of Zonko's tricks and the Marauder's map. Snape picked up the Zonko's bag. "Ron gave them to me," said Harry, praying he'd get the chance to tip Ron off before Snape saw him. He brought them back from Hogsmeade last time." "Indeed, and you've been carrying them around ever since. How very touching. And what is this?" Snape had picked up the map. Harry tried with all his might to keep his face impassive. "Spare bit of parchment," he said with a shrug. Snape turned it over, his eyes on Harry. "Surely you don't need such a very old piece of parchment," he said. "Why don't I just throw this away?" His hand moved toward the fire. "No," Harry said quickly. "So," said Snape, his long nostrils quivering, "is this another treasured gift from Mr. Weasley? Or is it something else? A letter, perhaps, written in invisible ink? Or instructions to get into Hogsmeade without passing the Dementors?" Harry blinked. Snape's eyes gleamed. Let me see," he muttered, taking out his wand and smoothing the map out on his desk. "Reveal your secret," he said, touching the wand to the parchment. Nothing happened. Harry clenched his hands to stop them from shaking. "Show yourself," Snape said, tapping the map sharply. It stayed blank. Harry was taking deep, calming breaths. "Professor Severus Snape, master of this school, commands you to yield the information you conceal," Snape said, hitting the map with his wand. As though an invisible hand were writing upon it, words appeared on the smooth surface of the map. "Mr. Mooney presents his compliments to Professor Snape and begs him to keep his abnormally large nose out of other people's business." Snape froze. Harry stared, dumbstruck, at the message. But the map didn't stop there. More writing was appearing beneath the first. "Mr. Prongs agrees with Mr. Mooney and would like to add that Professor Snape is an ugly git." It would have been very funny if the situation hadn't been so serious. And there was more. "Mr. Padfoot would like to register his astonishment that an idiot like that ever became a professor." Snape closed his eyes in horror. When he'd opened them, the map had its last word. "Mr. Wormtail bids Professor Snape good day and advises him to wash his hair, the slime ball." Harry waited for the blow to fall. "So," said Snape softly, "we'll see about this." He strode across to his fire, seized a handful of glittering powder from a jar on the fireplace, and threw it into the flames. "Lupin," Snape called from the fire, "I want a word." Utterly bewildered, Harry stared at the fire. A large shape had appeared in it, revolving very fast. Seconds later, Professor Lupin was clambering out of the fireplace, brushing ash off his shabby robes. "You called, Severus," said Lupin mildly. "I certainly did," said Snape. His face contorted with fury as he strode back to his desk. "I've just asked Potter to empty his pockets. He was carrying this." Snape pointed at the parchment, on which the words of Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs were still shining. An odd, closed expression appeared on Lupin's face. "Well," said Snape. Lupin continued to stare at the map. Harry had the impression that Lupin was doing some very quick thinking. "Well," said Snape again, "this parchment is plainly full of dark magic. This is supposed to be your area of expertise, Lupin. Where do you imagine Potter got such a thing?" Lupin looked up, and, by the merest half-glance in Harry's direction, warned him to not interrupt. "Full of dark magic," he repeated mildly. "Do you really think so, Severus? It looks to me as though it is merely a piece of parchment that insults anyone who reads it. Childish, but surely not dangerous. I imagine Harry got it from a joke shop." "Indeed," said Snape. His jaw had gone rigid with anger. "You think a joke shop could supply him with such a thing? You don't think it more likely that he got it directly from the manufacturers? Harry didn't understand what Snape was talking about, nor apparently did Lupin. You mean by Mr. Wormtail or one of these people, he said. Harry, do you know any of these men? No, said Harry quickly. You see, Severus, said Lupin, turning back to Snape, it looks like a Zonko product to me. Right on cue, Ron came bursting into the office. He was completely out of breath and stopped just short of Snape's desk, clutching the stitch in his chest and trying to speak. I gave Harry that stuff, he choked. Bought it in Zonkos ages ago. Well, said Lupin, clapping his hands together and looking around cheerfully. That seems to clear that up. Severus, I'll take this back, shall I? He folded the map and tucked it inside his robes. Harry, Ron, come with me. I need a word about my vampire essay. Excuse us, Severus. Harry didn't dare look at Snape as they left his office. He, Ron, and Lupin walked all the way back into the entrance hall before speaking. Then Harry turned to Lupin. Professor, I don't want to hear explanations, said Lupin shortly. He glanced around the empty entrance hall and lowered his voice. I happen to know that this map was confiscated by Mr. Filch many years ago. Yes, I know it's a map, he said as Harry and Ron looked amazed. I don't want to know how it fell into your possession. I am, however, astounded that you didn't hand it in, particularly after what happened the last time a student left information about the castle lying around. And I can't let you have it back, Harry. Harry had expected that, and was too keen for explanations to protest. Why did Snape think I'd got it from the manufacturers? Because... Lupin hesitated. Because these map makers would have wanted to lure you out of the school. They'd have think it extremely entertaining. Do you know them? Said Harry, impressed. We've met, he said shortly. He was looking at Harry more seriously than ever before. Don't expect me to cover up for you again, Harry. I cannot make you take Sirius Black seriously, but I would have thought that what you had heard when the Dementors drew near you would have had more of an effect on you. Your parents gave their lives to keep you alive, Harry. A poor way to repay them, gambling their sacrifice for a bag of magic tricks. He walked away, leaving Harry feeling worse by far than he had felt at any point in Snape's office. Slowly, he and Ron mounted the marble staircase. As Harry passed the One-Eyed Witch, he remembered the invisibility cloak. It was still down there, but he didn't dare go and get it. It's my fault, said Ron abruptly. I persuaded you to go. Lupin's right, it was stupid. We shouldn't have done it. He broke off. They reached the corridor where the security trolls were pacing, and Hermione was walking towards them. One look at her face convinced Harry that she had heard what had happened. His heart plummeted. Had she told Professor McGonagall? Came never good gloat, said Ron savagely as she stopped in front of them. Or have you just been to tell on us? No, said Hermione. She was holding a letter in her hands, and her lip was trembling. I just thought you ought to know. Hagrid lost his case. Buckbeak is going to be executed. Alright, that's the end of chapter 14. Messy chapter. Harry and Ron getting cocky and Hogsmeade messing with Malfoy to the point that they fuck up and getting in all kinds of trouble. Harry's cloak is still in the hidden passageway. The map is now with Lupin, who seems to know about it. And I'm honestly surprised there was no other punishment for Harry given at that moment. Just Snape being like... Snape like mauling or whatever, I don't know. Alright, so... poor Neville, indeed. You're in the ER watching this. Psycho, I love you. Why are you reading Turf Quran? I like Harry Potter. I like it. I like it. What book? This is Prisoner of Azkaban, the third Harry Potter book. How am I doing? I'm okay. I'm a little tired, I guess. I just did 3 chapters. Um, should I do any more? I don't know. So we're at chapter 15. There are 22 chapters, so that's like 2 more streams. So 15, 16, 17, maybe 18, that's 4. And then 19, 20, 21, 22, that's 4, right? So 4 and 4 next time, I guess. This is only 3, but maybe even 3 streams. Yeah, I don't know if I'm doing more right now. That was a decent reading. I wonder if I should do more or not. Maybe not. Maybe just save it for tomorrow. And yep, not much going on with me. Alright, let me I think well, yeah, I don't know. I think that might be the end of the reading today. There's gonna be 2 or 3 more streams to finish this book. So we're not at the climax of the story yet. You can see how far we are. We're in the second half, so still, here we go, there. Still a ways to go. Alright, I'm done with the stream. So thanks for watching, and more, I don't know when, tomorrow or the next day? Maybe tomorrow. Alright, thanks for watching.